now we get to Picasso. And at this point, we got to get a lot more specific about shifts and transitions as we build to that big movement of Cubism. And that means maybe learning some more specific dates for these transitions, since Picasso is always one, the second he masters the style, keep himself out of that into the next style. Never to be defined by any one style. What you should learn from that is he was always about multiple perspectives, multiple styles, multiple ways of taking your art and making it statement. We start with the early work to see that he's a child protege. Now he's coming out of Spain at this point. And he is doing the classical thing, the neoclassical thing, the way you were taught, plaster casts of ancient Greek Roman sculpture, doing it very masterfully, rendering the form in chiaroscuro in a really amazing way, especially considering he was 13 years old at the time. So these are the drawings. That was the drawing that he did for his to get into the Academy in Barcelona, which he got into at that young age. First Communion on the left is one of the first paintings he showed, and it's very competent work. You can see that in terms of what the outer eye sees. Very good at rendering things up by candlelight. Very good at showing you the different materials he's used. Very good at white on white. Not easy thing to pull up. And Dad, the bearded man, is the one who's instructing this. So it's very conventional, not breaking any rules, nothing avant-garde about it, but very competent, especially since he's 15 years old at the time. Now he gets away from Dad. He's going back and forth between Barcelona and Spain and Paris, and we get his first original style, the blue period. Defined, I think, or named because it's predominantly blue, predominantly monochromatic, but that color is there to set a mood. And that mood is one of having the blues, maybe better put, it's the mood of melancholy. So what we see here is his first original style, and I want you to think of the blue period perhaps as Picasso's symbolism. It's not always called that, but I think that's an interesting way for you to see these bigger patterns and for you to understand what is symbolism about. Well, it's when words fail. And when his good friend Kazigama dies, there's no words for him to understand that. He has to work through it with his art. It is a moment when pictures are in some sense from that reverse side of the eye, and you'll see in the blue period, you see it right here. This is when vision turns inward. So this is what the outer eye sees. This is when vision turns inward. And it's a different kind. When vision turns inward, you don't have to play it by the rules of proportion. You can stretch the body if that gives you more of a spiritual sense of need, or a kind of hunger artist moment where you're painting out of a sense of lack, where you're trying to paint the need of the spiritual soul. So you can distort color if that's what you need to set the mood, to give you an otherworldly quality, to give you almost an out-of-body experience. Twist the body to give you an out-of-body experience, to make the body stand for a spiritual longing, and on all these works, there's a kind of black hole moment at the center where there's just no way to fill it, because there's no answer to the big questions. We have a lot of absinthe drinkers. Look at her body turned in a fetal position. Look what happens to space. Tips it up. He's compressing the space because everything is about emotional or psychological tension here, not about just what the outer eye sees. He continues this with paintings like The Tragedy and La Vie. So they are, again, big titles because symbolism asks the big questions of life. And that's where there are no clear-cut answers. And that's what all these paintings do, especially when he loses his friend Kazigama's. This is what I mean. At the center, there's a kind of lack and a longing and a loss. So the blue period is that built out of that sense that there's something lacking, that the spiritual soul needs to nourish it. Everything is done in a very universal way, kind of like these people could almost exist in any time period. These are sort of deep senses of pathos about the human condition. Pathos, meaning compassion for the sense of tragic that is there in the human condition. So that goes with the blue period. Kazigama's, remember, was impotent. He committed suicide. Picasso felt a lot of guilt. He wasn't there for his friend, failed his friend that way. Paints this scene called Life. It seems to be really it almost looks like a grave marker. It's all about death, about the question of death. And that question of death hangs right here in the center with no clear-cut answer. This painting we talked about as the death of allegory, the end of the allegory. Because most allegories, there is a kind of clear-cut moral or a clear-cut kind of message about the meaning of it all. But in this case, it's much harder to define that, and that's that symbolist moment. His father told him, look at Velázquez. Whatever you do not look at El Greco. So, of course, when he gets to the Prado, he runs right past Velázquez and makes a beeline for El Greco. El Greco is also an artist, a hunger artist. An artist who's used a mannered moment earlier. He'd fallen out of favor. Nobody knew how to look at this awkward art. What's the matter? Didn't he have proper glasses? Couldn't he see right? Now, with this new kind of definition of an art that can abstract and distort to get an emotional truth, an underground truth. Remember, this is the moment when truth goes underground. It's no longer just in the outer appearance of things. So suddenly we can see it, and you can see the bodies kind of influenced by El Greco, stretched, gaunt. The old guitarist, I want you to imagine what kind of music his music would sound like. He is a blind, so it's vision turned inward. Vision turned inward is an important way to think about symbolism, along with when words fail. And that's why I think you can make a real case that these are symbolist pictures. Now, even though it's not blue, you should recognize from the figure type, from the fact that these two people are together, they still seem to be alone. Yin and yang kind of quality of them. You should be able to recognize this as a blue period work. The hunger aspect there is their frugal meal. All they have is day-old bread and the cheapest wine you can buy. So our blue period is very much this tragic moment, his first encounter with tragedy through his friend's death. Now the rose period, by this point things are lightening up. What are your dates? We'll say the 1890s for his early work, his early academic work, those two works. Then the blue period, think of it that way, just the 1890s. Then let's start the 20th century. From 1901 to 1904, you've got the blue period. You can date it anywhere in there. If you round it out to 1905, you've got a problem. Because 1905 is the 1 year of the rose period. So you got to be a little more precise in how you slice and dice your Picasso. But if you just think through the logic of his development, it should help dictate the years. Rose period is 1905. You've gotten there, and he's lightening up the palette. It's not bittersweet instead of the weight of tragedy. He has a family. It's sometimes called the circus period because he has a family of friends that he's made. In this picture, the family of Salt and Banks still shows them as a band of modern artists, and you see this in the blue period too. Who do you think you're art for? It's not the church anymore. It's not the king anymore. You're making it for a modern audience you don't know whom. You're making it for yourself. So you find yourself adrift. This is the moment of the bohemian artist, the beginnings of an avant-garde that's separate, that's kind of in a bohemian marginal status with their place in society. They're unanchored from a specific patron. But they're forming a band of artists here, and he's got a girlfriend, and everything kind of lightens up, even though everything still seems to be talking about the artist working sort of on the margins of society at a kind of bittersweet tone. What pushes him out of the rose period really quickly is meeting Gertrude Stein, his first patron, and there had been nobody like Gertrude in his life. He thought women were goddesses or doormats. Well, Gertrude was neither. She really did some gender bending on him and made him rethink things. Our Jewish lesbian from California will very quickly become the center of the Parisian cultural world at this time. Her salon, every week, artists would meet there. Ernest Hemingway, Matisse meets Picasso at Gertrude's salon. Very important crossing place for artists and for ideas. And Gertrude's at the center of it all with her partner, Alice B. Toklas. So there we see him sitting down to do her portrait, which he does in 1906. Now you can remember that. Because you know he has to do her portrait right before he can do the Demoiselle d'Avignon, and you know the year of the Demoiselle d'Avignon better than you know your own birthday, right? So that's 1907. So see, you can date these things. When you get to Gertrude Stein, when you got to her, how do you picture that woman? How do you picture a woman like Gertrude? He has to rethink his style. So his style, he tried to paint her mimetically. He had her come sit for him 80 times. She said, in order to paint my portrait, he had to go from being a boy and to becoming a man. So on the way to doing that, he couldn't stand to look at her any longer. He leaves town, he leaves the country, he goes back to Spain, and there he discovers for the first time the ancient primitive sculpture of the Iberian Peninsula. Iberian sculpture, the sculpture that has Moorish tendencies in it, but that is really the ancient primitive sculpture of his roots, Iberian sculpture. And in Iberian sculpture, he's discovering the primitive, so-called primitive, for the first time, where it is not mimetic, it is not Western mimesis. It is instead a kind of going outside Western European culture to discover a different way to think of the face than a mirror. Think of it as a diagram. The almond shape stands for eyes. The scroll stands for ears. So without even seeing her again, he paints in that face influenced by Iberian sculpture. So the primitive had an important role in rethinking portraiture. And that portraiture does not have to be a mimetic resemblance. Portraiture could be this mask of the face that destabilizes identity, that makes the face more abstract, that maybe creates a new definition for what a portrait likeness should be, that it captures your strength, that it captures a different way of this thinking woman. Okay, on the other side of Gertrude and the homoerotic boys of Ghazal that he also did that summer. In 1907, the entire year belongs to the Demoiselle. They own him. And he has to conquer this picture. We know there's lots of sketchbooks, hundreds really of sketches and other designs and other paintings that he's churning out. So this is quite a pivotal turning point. For many, this is the birth of Cubism, but he doesn't know that yet. They're not calling it that yet. So we think of the moment of Gertrude Stein's portrait and Demoiselle d'Avignon as the primitive, quote, quote. I put them scare quotes because remember, we're not labeling Iberian sculpture and African art as primitive. We're just showing the Parisians unable to see it as anything but. But for Picasso, what was so exciting about African art was how rational it was. It was an art of the mind, not an art of perception of what the outer eye sees. So it's a different way to conceptually map a face, to diagram a face. And this is going to be huge. So this kind of happens in those years, 1906, 1907, right after the Rose period. We have these 5 women considered some of the least seductive nudes in the history of art, a species of bitch goddess. And you can see them displaying Iberian sculptural features and African. Now, if the Demoiselle should pop up on the exam, and it has, you have to connect it to the lessons of the primitive. To miss that, to forget that, is to forget something really huge and important, right? To forget how the so-called primitive art is their way of rethinking Western mimesis. So you need to get there, and to mention primitive is a good way to do it. To talk about that it's the effects of Iberian sculpture and African would be even better. So you see, it's how far you detail it, how far you probe, how far you push. But that's not the only thing going on, right? We have the space, one-point perspective being kind of exploded and imploded. And so we have the beginnings of multiple perspectives, simultaneous shifting multiple perspectives. We have the body being dismembered into bits and pieces, in some sense, taking the nude apart, taking the whole Academy's formula of nudes apart, and in the process taking apart the idea of beauty, capital B, and kind of rearranging all this. And there really is no way to separate figure from ground here. If you try, the structure collapses. I had a student who took me up on that, and she kind of made the form so that you could eliminate, pull them out, and the whole structure collapsed. They're too interknit. So there's a lot of ways in which Cubism is beginning here, and it's not pretty. It's the birth of Cubism, and it's like, you know, birth can be pretty messy. So, but it's powerful, strong. You can't hang a gold curly cube rococo frame and it pushes right into your face. It is work that would be highly influential for all those other artists who would see it. It's certainly nothing the Academy would ever accept. It started out as a picture of virtues and vices with two men in it, a good art history student carrying his book, and a scholar, and a sailor sitting among all the flesh and the juicy watermelon wedges, right? So sitting among all the women. It very quickly, he drops the men out, and in some sense, it's almost as if the man and the woman merge. So there's a lot of gender bending going on after Gertrude's time. So you need to think your way through the Demoiselle. It is in your computer tutorial, so you can read more about it. It's important work. As it goes through, he plays with this figure. She kind of turns her head around. And then in the final work, you see that here she's doing what we call the charm school dropout pose. And then she turns her head around until she is facing us both head on and ass on simultaneously. So those are those mutual points. You can't do that in reality, but in painting you can. So you can rearrange the body parts so that she is literally mooning the Academy and staring at us. And look at the woman's gaze, her ability to stare us down. She doesn't become an object for some presumed male gaze, but she has her own gaze that she fixes out. So very confrontational painting, and this, especially the squatting woman with the African face that gave him a new way to depict the features. This is the Trocadero Museum where he went to see the work. Matisse had already gone there. He heard about that, so he had to go because he couldn't let Matisse get the better of him. These are two boys in the hood. Yeah, he was going to be boss. Now, after the Demoiselle, I think we can start to say we're in Cubism. Analytic Cubism begins. First thing you do is drop out color, because color gets in the way if you're trying to rethink space like it hasn't been thought since the development of one-point perspective in the Renaissance. So if you're rethinking space in the flat picture plane, you got to get rid of color because it pushes and pulls too much with red, with warm colors and cool colors. So color drops out. He also kind of closes the eyes, you know, makes it a little less sensational, a little less of that confrontation, because he's really rigorously going to focus in on rethinking form, shape, and space. So he uses all browns and ochres and greens, you know, earth tones, earth palette. The greens will drop out by 1910. So anything that still shows greens in here, that would be the beginning stages of analytic cubism. It would be pre-1910. This is right after the Demoiselle, 1909. And what starts to become evident here in the way he depicts the body, in the way he takes the body and breaks it down into different facets, planes in space, how he knits those different planes in space together, and they knit not only in the body, but they knit with the surrounding space, the fusion of figure and ground, how you transition from one facet to the next. That is passage. That came from Cézanne. So it's the lessons of African art and the lessons of Cézanne's passage that helps him create Cubism. Puts those together. It works like this one, the three women. Then you see him continuing the lessons of Cézanne on the left in something like the houses in Horta de Ebro. We're in 1909 here, 1908, 1909 with those works. And you can see how he's knit. It does look cubist. This is when we get volumetric flatness. But remember, everything's being looked at from multiple perspectives. And what is ground really knits right together with the surrounding space, so everything flattens and turns the flat picture plane. So these two, Horta de Ebro, and that's the reservoir we looked at, where you're looking at it from above, from straight on, and from below, the bottom of this bridge simultaneously. Can you still see the bits of green? That tells you we're not to 1910 yet. See, there's all the way. Figure it out. But look at where we are now. Volumetric flatness gradually gives way to the linear network of the grid. It gradually becomes grid. And you know then we're further. We're closer to the advanced stages of analytical cubism, when they sometimes say it's hermetic, it's like hermetically sealed, it's so difficult to decipher. We still have this breast that is kind of like you can grab onto it and honk it. So we still have something that seems volumetric and flat at the same time. This is the woman with the mandolin from 1910. The green, there's a little bit of green. This is going out maybe, but it's mainly really everything's becoming more rigorous. And when it gets hard to decipher, when there's no more volumetric, when it's just these shifting, flickering bits of light and shadow, line and form, all kind of coexisting, but not kind of making a mass in front of you, when the figure almost looks bulldozed and analyzed to that degree, then we're in the later stages of 1910, heading to 1911. And this is his portrait of his next dealer, Kahnweiler, the German. So that would be early 1910 and late 1910. Do you see how far he's getting in just a short time? And am I going to make you? Yes, you must tell me not only the year, but no. Am I dating here for you? Analytic Cubism really starts in 1909. You can think. Remember, a lot of the pivotal years from most of this from now on is 1910 to 1915. So you can really sort of date it. You can, if you see green, it's maybe before 1910, but just take it up to about 1911, 12, that's the shift to synthetic cubism. And then synthetic cubism. And you want to identify whether it's analytic cubism or synthetic. That would be the better answer. Okay, by this point, it's getting pretty hard to know what the hell you're looking at unless you read the title. It's a nude woman. Oh, of course. So that's a really late advanced state. That'd be late 1910 into 1911. This is his painting of the recording this. So we're getting to the point where he's virtually on the path to complete abstraction. In the next picture, he could go completely abstract, and we don't have a figure there anymore. We don't have any instrument. But instead, he does this. He does Montjoly. So this is a key turning point picture for you. To date this would be to date it 1911-12. To say it's right there at the cusp. It's right happening. He's probably overlapping, working through the winter break painting, 1911, 1912. And he adds the letters. Now, when he adds the letters, when he adds a musical clef, instead of letting it go completely abstract, he's starting to collage in little bits and fragments of the real. And starting to make you kind of read it both from, look what starts to happen with collage. You get multiple perspectives and multiple styles. Different ways of representing. No one way more important than the other. So a word, Montjoly, starts to suggest something, the musical clef, and then you get a very difficult to decipher figure of a woman with a mandolin, all in one picture. So Montjoly is the beginnings of synthetic, and collage follows fast. Collage meaning using actual bits of the real, not just words, but actual bits like a rope, like contact paper that indicates chair painting. So this is still like a chair painting. If this were to pop up, you'd want to call it the first collage ever. The first collage ever. As a little bitty thing, the first collage in the history of art, at least, considered a finished work. And it plays with so much of things that analytically render shifting perspectives on a glass where we see it from this way, from that way, see it from so many angles. A little foreshortened pipe thrown into three-dimensional letters. Remember the letters Ju? They don't stand for anything, but if you extend them, Jur, Journal, Juju, they start to suggest multiple meanings. So this is his way of really pursuing multiple perspectives to that degree of pluralism, where no one style is better than any rest. The rest. This is another synthetic. When you do get to synthetic collage, it also brings in color. And you can start to separate out Braque and Picasso more from that point on. So here is his musical instruments, a piece of real newspaper, collage with real wallpaper, real bit of newspaper here, music here, wallpaper here, multiple styles and ways to put the scene together. You get a real hybrid. So I put the top 10 key points together. I'm not sure this is the same list of top key points in the same order I gave you before. But I have that list with me. And it's not important, as I said, that you know this top 10 in any particular order. And it's you don't have to memorize this top 10 either. These are just different ways to think about Cubism so you get some of the key important ideas that are being brought up. Well, I thought I got those top 10. Oh, I took them out, put them in another folder. You know what? I was thinking about that. Okay. I will. And then I'll review it with my other list, so we won't waste the time right now. I see people photographing it. My top 10 key points. But just to review them with you, because I pulled them out, and this helped me review. Lessons of African art. Now, what were they? No longer to think of imitating outer appearances and mirroring nature, instead diagramming the subject, and it is a countercultural critique of Western mimesis. That's a lot. What did he get from Cezanne? Passage. The fusion of figure and ground, which affirms the flat picture plane. Volumetric flatness, which increasingly pushes toward the flat linear network of the grid in the later stages. Multiple perspectives, rethinking the illusions of one point perspective. Braque, in Cubism, the subject is not the object. You can work with that. The subject is not the object, and what is? Cubism is much more than a rendering of the subject matter. The subject matter of Cubism is kind of dull. So it's much more than that. I no longer believe in things, I believe only in relations. It's about network. It's about networking, thinking in terms of networks. It's really timely for a computer age like ours, thinking in networks. Shifting frames of reference. There's no one absolute truth, since point of view is relative to frame of reference. Am I moving or am I not? Am I leaving or am I arriving? So it's shifting frames of reference. Space-time. You can't think of one without the other. So write it as one word, and this parallels with Einstein's theory of relativity, space and time. So you add the dimension of time. That's what Cubism does. It adds a temporal dimension. Collage, the turning point, the beginning of mixed media. In collage, you decontextualize, you take something of the real away, and then you put it into the picture, so you recontextualize it. That's really important. Mixed media will grow out of that. It leads to hybridity, to pluralism, multiple styles. That's being what the Cubist project's really about. I think the list I gave you before wasn't quite as good as this one, I like to think, but I'll go back and review. Revolt against the static. Focus is on dynamics by reconceiving the picture plane as an all-over energy field. Do you see what I'm doing now? I'm trying to highlight different stylistic developments, but I'm trying to put a bigger concept behind it, bigger theories behind it at work, so you can get a better sense. So I will try and send you this list and the other one I made up for expressions, so you don't have to try and copy it right now. We moved on to Braque. Braque, of course, was working with Picasso every step of the way. Once they start to join forces right around 1909, 1910. Braque starts out as a Fauvist in this earlier work, and the way to date Braque? Just think, well, if he's a Fauve, that's going to put him closer to around 1905, 1906. This one, he clearly has seen the Demoiselle d'Avignon, so that's 1907. That's his grand news, and that changed things for him. After this, he goes to study very hard what Cezanne had painted in Lestat. So this is the beginnings of Analytical Cubism. That would be, there's green, 1909. Then he moves into a more developed Analytical Cubism here with the one with the violin. And the violin and the palette, 1909, 1910. There's a little bit of green, so it spans that portion. But now green is gone. It's more developed Analytic Cubism, where volumetric flatness is flattened out through the linear network. This is the Portuguese, the letters make it completely the same time as Majoli. So remember, they couldn't tell their own work apart. So that makes it 1911, 1912 right in there. And then his collage, same time period, is still like with Cercani, only this one the clarinet. You can see they're starting to separate now. He's more elegant than Picasso at this point. More like his father, the house interior decorator.